This is Python's Paradise. This is your host, Greg Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena, straight out of Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, here on March the 14th, 2023. And folks, I have a wonderful guest on the show today. Or I should say this evening, and I'm always happy to talk about one of my favorite thrillers, Ms. 45, which I've got right here on Blu-ray. I don't know there we go. It's showing up here now. And of course, with the shirt, the T-shirt for anybody that happens to see this on video, Ms. 45, starring Zoe Lund. And folks, I have one of her early victims here on the show, a very fast runner. And a guy that ran very fast into the wrong alley. Folks, I give you the awesome Vincent Grupi. How do you do, Vincent?
How are you, Greg? It's great to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. I did five tributes on Zoe with her widow, Robert Lund, and I've had Steven Singer, of course, who was the sleazy photographer. I had him on here last year, and that was a lot of fun, and so happy I was able to get hold of you and track you down and have you come on here and talk about this film. It's an interesting little discovery for me, and I'll just give a little background here because I know I shared this with you privately, but I'll share it for people that are listening. I discovered Miss 45 when I
Just more.
yeah when I rented Terror in the Isles, which of course was hosted by Donald Pleasance and Nancy Allen, and had compilations of all these different horror films on it. And that was where I discovered Ms. 45, and was pretty captivated by the footage of Zoe in there. I mean, how could you not? And that was my introductory to the film, and eventually I finally got to see the film, including a little big screen presentation of it, which I got to attend, which was a lot of fun. So um, I'm very well versed in this film right now, and very delighted to have you on here. But before we talk about Ms. 45, I would love a little bit of your background and what led you to getting involved with the film.
Well, thank you for the chance of telling my side of this story. You're probably the only person that's ever going to hear this because there was so much going on in New York at that time. It's almost important to set the scene first in order for everybody to understand where we all came from. And in the late 70s, New York was basically bankrupt. There were shooting galleries blocks away from NYU where I went to school. It was, a lot of change socially. I would run a gamut of transvestites at 6 o'clock in the morning from the night before in order to get to Bop's library. Okay. And, I was just a kid from Brooklyn. These were sights and sounds that were really over the top. I went to NYU Film and TV, and then that's where I met Rob Schweber. And Rob Schweber was my grip on a movie that I was working on, Mr. Lonely. Um, and he was doing some PA work, apparently for Abel, and recommended me for the role of the rapist, which unfortunately I did not get. But about 3 weeks later, I got a phone call and Abel said, "You're in, but you're going to get killed." So it was, in other words, a different part. And I asked him about it, and he was kind of cagey. I think it was the producer that called me, and they didn't really give me too much information. They just said, "You're going to get killed." So I said, "Okay." But, here's another bit of extra background. Guess what? I was a special effects major. Okay. My specialty was prosthetics. So when I got to the set and I found out they were going to blow up my forehead with just using some collodion, which is basically mortician's wax, and a tube, they were going to run through my hair with a squeeze bulb on the end filled with, stage blood. I said,
Mhm.
it's not going to work. And they spent 3 hours, doing that to discover that they never ended up using it in the film, which is testimony it didn't look the way they wanted. Of course, Abel in the subsequent films had much more money to work with and much better special effects. I mean, what he did in Invasion of the Body Snatchers was nothing less than astounding. But in this little humble Ms. 45 beginning for me and partially for him, I think he did Driller Killer before this.
Mhm.
It was his entree film. It was a good beginning. He was wise to pull it out. Okay. But here's the problem. I told the producer immediately, and this is why, by the way, they misspelled my last name. I'm alleging that. I don't have proof
Okay.
directly. But the event that happened was I explained to them that they were going to destroy I knew by using the technique of pouring stage blood over my clothing, they were going to destroy them. So I said, look, I don't mind if you blow up my clothes. I said, but would you replace them? And they agreed. And then of course I had to call like 5 times to get a producer on the phone to get a check. Because it was an underground film. I mean, there were guys with sunglasses and folded arms standing at every location. I said, Abel, who are those guys? I mean, I recognized them, as a joke, I'm saying this because they all looked Italian. I said, but, he says, well, this is a non union film and that has certain consequences. So, anyway, the wrap up is that I got paid.
Mhm.
Um, but I must have pissed off the producer, and that's why I got the two P's instead of the correct spelling with one. I can't
Okay.
I can't prove that, but and maybe I sounded like a know-it-all, telling them it wasn't going to work before they even tried. But what I would have done was I would have used an appliance. I would have made a mold of my forehead that stood out a half an inch or so, kind of like a Frankenstein thing.
Mhm.
And then you would have had space to hide everything that they needed, like my hairline and the the nozzle that needed to spray blood. And that's how I would have approached it, more or less. A little more, complexity, because it means that and of course expense,
Yep.
because you would have to sit somebody down for a face mask, and then you would have to have a modeler mold, the appliance in addition to that, and then make a mold of that, and then inject rubber into it, and that would probably consume maybe a couple of days of a talented artist. Um, in any event, just one of the small details of the story that probably most people wouldn't know.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned Driller Killer. I think Miss 45 is a far better movie than Driller Killer. They both got a lot of things in common, but I think Miss 45 is certainly a much better polished movie. But it's interesting because when you're first seen, you're standing on a street corner, harassing the female passerbys. But there's this elderly blind guy sitting there, and you see him in Driller Killer as well.
Just stop right there.
Yeah.
You want to know the best line that was on the cutting room floor?
Yeah.
Well, Abel says to me, now, because I already ran the scene, and for some
Hmm.
reason he thought he needed some cutaways or some additional footage. So he goes, "We're going to shoot some B-roll." He goes, "I want you to say this." He goes, "Look at the blind man and say you ain't missing nothing, Pete." And it never made it in the film. I mean, am I wrong? Because the version that I saw, it didn't have it. And of course, I remember filming it and getting the coaching from Abel.
Well, in the uncut version, you're not saying Pete, you're saying you're not missing shit.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there it is. through the filter of 50 years time.
There you go. Yeah,
Okay,
they got it uncut on here. So
that's
they
the uncut version. They're not showing that on, I guess, Netflix or one of those wonderful
hmm
platforms.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So do, I must ask, who was the elderly guy? I'm kind of curious because he's silent, just sitting there in both of these movies.
which elderly guy are you referring to?
The blind guy.
Oh, so I don't know. He was some actor that they hired to just sit there and say nothing.
That's what he did in
Yeah.
Driller Killer too.
Oh, okay. Well, he was kind of like, like Scorsese's drummer, Vinny the drummer in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
The guy has
yeah.
no, real role in the movie, but I mean, he's colorful and amazing. So I suppose this fellow in front of the candy store, hit Abel the same way. He was
There
like
you
my fourth. I mean, I was able to say things to him. Apparently, at least that was the setup.
there you go. Well, when you first appear on screen, it's kind of funny because you kind of resemble John Travolta and Grease, you know?
That's his jacket. That's not mine. It
Uh-huh.
was my T-shirt, my Adidas and
hmm
my Levi's. Okay, I kept it classic, but I don't know, he put some kind of Polish leather jacket on me from the early '80s. I guess he thought he was classing me up, but in the end, I think I ended up looking more like a stereotype. I never would have picked. I never would, Again, there you go, costuming, makeup. It's all on a kind of a climbing scale for Abel. I mean, every movie that he made, of course, getting to Bad Lieutenant, you really can't talk about him without talking about the magnum opus of Bad
hmm
Lieutenant. And
Yep.
in fact, I'll tell you an interesting story about that. I was talking to a famous Hollywood director a month ago, and I mentioned that somebody called me for an interview on this movie, and I thought because of my relationship with the director that was his best picture, Bad Lieutenant. And the famous Hollywood director said, "Oh, I love him. I was just at his house last week, and he wasn't there." And I'm thinking to myself, how often do you go to famous stars' homes when they're not there? I mean, isn't that a weird thing to do?
hmm
Anyway, I can tell them that, I don't always tell people what I think unless I'm speaking to millions of people like with interviewers.
hmm
Um, but so where were we?
You're talking about uh Bad Lieutenant and famous people's homes, the director.
Yeah, it really was it's a simply amazing movie for me, Bad Lieutenant. And what I'm
hmm
getting at is the arc of Abel's output constantly, from Driller Killer to Miss 45 to, these other movies we're discussing, in a constant upward arc. And in fact, honestly, he was Tarantino before Tarantino.
Yep.
And, he was better than, I mean, I'm gonna say it. He was better than Tarantino because I think that Tarantino sexualizes violence, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think that's kind of like what Satanists do. Not to put a point on it,
hmm
but I mean, fucking the earth and all that. But Abel was an Italian who took it in, especially with the rape of the nun, into that sort of like that more Scorsese religious direction
hmm
where you've got a person in spiritual crisis. His movies are about people in spiritual crisis more than isn't that guy cool and look at that flashy motorcycle and doesn't she look trashy and you know enough of that. That's chewing gum. That's bubble gum for me. But Abel, even when he made crude films, because they were about spiritual conflict,
hmm
were dynamic and relevant and more and had layers. And of course less than just it's a lot of the two-dimensional crap you get out of Hollywood.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I got to talk about Zoe for a minute. I thought she was stunning, in this movie, and of course, she was also in Bad Lieutenant. She was one of the writers behind it. She had red hair in that. Man, she was gorgeous. Went way too young. You know, she was only 37 when she passed, but um, but nonetheless, Miss 45, of course. Her second rapist didn't exactly do so well. He ended up being cut all to pieces, and she's like distributing his body parts all around the city. And of course, where you're trying to pick up the girls on the street corner, you
Let me
make the
say something.
mistake of, yeah,
Let me say something about all that. I
yeah,
mean, for what it's worth, what impresses me about actors and actresses is not just what they put down on film or on stage, it's how they live their lives. That's the real test. And that's the one that not everyone passes. In my case, I had experiences because of this film that literally convinced me this was not for me. And I was wise enough to take a step back and think about doing other things.
hmm
But other people don't take that step back. And I think that's what you're really discussing here when you talk about Zoe. I think you're talking about a person that came to a point in her life artistically where personally, excuse me, she needed to take a step back because those two things were intersecting and not in a positive way. And I thought she was, yes, of course, lovely, dynamic. She was Nastasia Kinski on coke. She was, you know, Rossellini, Isabella, um, American style. She was, just again, a very edgy, dynamic, multi-leveled, and honest actress.
yep,
Honest, almost in the vein of Marilyn. Not perfect, but honest.
hmm
And I think those imperfections led to her unfortunate demise.
just
Sadly.
unfortunate. Yeah, yeah. What was your impression of her upon meeting her?
How brutally honest do you want it?
However honest you want to give it. My jaw probably would have dropped had I met her. She was beautiful.
Again, put it in context. This is pre-AIDS. Sex didn't kill you.
hmm
Okay. Post 70s, free love. So everybody wants to get laid. Okay. And I'm 21 and in the army and training like a maniac every week. So I look, rock hard. She's just the cutest thing.
hmm
But here's the disconnect. I I mean, we're all sensual beings. We all interpret signals invisibly. I did not make a visceral sexual connection to Zoe the moment that we met, even though I saw all those other wonderful attributes. And that is a very rare thing because it wasn't on me. I mean, what I'm saying is she was not available, which is a very unusual thing for a young woman or a young man at that age.
hmm
Um, and I don't want to speculate why. I mean, obviously that's a personal choice,
Yep.
but an interesting one, I thought. And I mean, now you could say, well, she was just being a consummate professional. You could say that, but she was too. I mean, honestly, and I don't mean this as a disparage. She was too young.
Yeah.
I mean, and you could say, well, maybe that was the level of detachment because of her personal habits. But I mean, she wasn't detached. She was involved in the moment, or she would not have made a great film as she did.
Hmm.
So she was, connected. You know, the human psyche is a mysterious thing, isn't it, Greg?
Yeah, yeah. And of
It's just
course,
female.
huh?
I often can parse it. I mean, you would have thought that, that you could easily explain certain people's attributes, but you can't always.
No. Well, you, of course, you mentioned being involved with the army. Of course, that would have meant you would have been in good shape, and you would have had to because you did a massive running scene in this movie. Talk about doing the running scene.
What's really weird is I think they asked me, or they had Great Jones Alley, or I don't know, wherever they shot that location was someplace I had taken a chick in my car. And it was embarrassing. Once I found out, somehow I felt like the spirit of my past fornication was going to be involved in this shooting. But the fact is, New York has so many, crannies and nooks and hideaways, even in this glorious modern time, you had all these old dead end streets. And that was the magic part really of New York. Um, that alley was just simply perfect because you had all the brownstones surrounding it with all the fire escapes. The turn of the century from 1900, the fire escapes. So you had it was like this brick and wrought iron crucible.
Hmm.
And I mean it was really a perfect location to get killed in, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, they had that great shot of you coming right up to the camera, and then she just spins around with the gun and wham. And that I know when talking to Robert, he had disclosed to me that one of the things that he said that Zoe had said was that was a big moment where she was holding the gun and she realized, she had power over men at that moment. And you can kind of see that in her eyes after she's kind of realizing, because that, of course, leads to what happens afterwards.
Greg,
Hmm.
life imitates art. Okay, I married a girl from Colombia, introduced to me by friends of 6 years that owned the largest private school in Bogota. And I had no idea that she was taking antidepressants to cure or treat epilepsy. And 9 months into the marriage, after coming here on a K1, I bought her a new Honda, and I had to go to the dealership to take care of some things. And somehow, some way, she had convinced herself that I wasn't at the dealership, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
And when I got home, the week before, that same car, and this is the reason why I was in the dealership, it was robbed. And they used a knife to cut the convertible top to get the seats, which were worth $7,500. So because we had people that were knew where I lived and were coming back. This was the second time it was robbed and using deadly weapons. I showed my wife how to use my gun. And when I came home from that day that she thought I wasn't where I was supposed to be, she had my gun trained in my face, just like the movie.
Okay.
And she pulled the trigger. But there was an empty chamber in the revolver, which I kept just in case it was dropped and the hammer hit the floor. So there wasn't any misfires. And then she used one on herself and left this world.
I'm sorry.
Well, the reality that I'm trying to allude to here is we're all playing for keeps. These may seem like movies, but they're not. These are real people pulling real experiences out of their guts to strangers, just like I did right now.
Hmm.
And And that's what makes it real. And that's what makes, actresses and actors that are willing to do that different. And this is my way of saying she's not really gone, just like my wife. Zoe lives on in all these movies, in these conversations.
Hmm.
I mean, for God's sakes, if you were a witch, you could conjure her. That's how real the impact that these people who lay it on the line really have. And it stays with me even all these years later. It's real.
Absolutely. Now, of course, Abel Ferreira directed Miss 45, and he's had quite the career, and he's not somebody I've had on here before, but I'll tell you, what an interesting director. Talk about first meeting him and working with him on this film.
I mean, I'm going to be blunt. Sam Peckinpah used what they call the Italian method, which
Hmm.
means if you want somebody to bend over, you punch them in the stomach. And these guys were fucking crazy. I mean, I tried to, I went to, Stella Adler's acting class at NYU, and I did method acting with my teachers. And it was really over the top. I felt like a pimp. As a director, I was forcing human beings to do what I wished by hook or crook, meaning, it didn't, again, that Italian method doesn't really reconcile another person's feelings. I mean, today it would be very unwoke to put it that way. But what I'm suggesting is these guys were, again, it was almost like a Brechtian invisible line between what they did and the real world.
Hmm.
Really, you suspend your disbelief when you sit in a chair and watch their work. To their minds, there's no line. If somebody walked in front of that frame and it looked good, he's in. If a mistake happens that they love, it stays. This is the cinema verite that, again, if you're trying to describe the people that made this and really what made them, it was real. They didn't see it. I don't think they saw it as an abstract. What they were trying to, in my humble opinion, what they were after was verite.
Absolutely. So, after did you go to the premiere of Miss 45? No.
We're going to get to two of my best stories. So which
Oh,
one? Which one do you want first? The breakup inspired by the premiere, or the near-death experience?
oh my goodness.
Listen to
Let's.
me. This gets back to what I said about what they do in front of the camera is only part of it. The real magic happens in their personal lives when it all comes down, when every single friend of yours is now no longer sitting next to people that they know, because you suddenly got a bunch of new friends. Wow, where'd they all come from? I mean, and you must have heard all this before, having spoken to a lot of people that
Mhm.
have had to live the life. It's challenging. So yes, I went to the premiere. I took a dancer friend, a ballet dancer, I might add, and that enraged my girlfriend. So she broke up with me.
I'm sorry.
And well, she tried to punch me in the nose once for not having sex with her. So it was kind of on the rocks to begin with.
Okay.
I throw these words around because even though they're true, that was a different time. People, I don't know, they weren't marching to the same drum that people do today. What back then, what would be considered violence and battery I don't know, usually involved a knife or a gun, but hands were okay, especially open hands. Of course, today, you just even saying something to someone can bring in a team of lawyers. So it's a different world. You sort of have to look at all the conversations we're having in the context of the milieu of that time, which really was different. I mean, truly. Um, does that capture some of it?
Yes, it does. And then you mentioned near-death experience.
Well, here's one that I hope isn't misunderstood because, again, you're going to take it in context, okay? I
Okay.
mean, New York was declared bankrupt. There were shooting galleries everywhere. Crime was going up about 5 or 10% every year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess it was a year after the release of Ms. 45 that I was going to Peppermint Lounge. Okay, so I was an announcer for a band,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a gig at Peppermint Lounge that night in Times Square. So I got to set it up for you. It's Saturday night. It's 12 o'clock. There's 6 lanes of bumper to bumper traffic going each direction on 42nd Street and Broadway, which is where the hell I am, where all the marquee lights are lit up and flashing. Okay. And apparently I didn't know it. Well, anyway, let me not mess up the story. So as I'm on one side of the street, with all these lights flashing, alone, ready to cross to get to the other side, I see on the other side of the street, directly across from me, is a group of about 10 or 12 black men, young, holding cans of beer and partying and making a lot of noise. And they start walking towards me, and I just happen to be crossing the street towards them. And as we get in the middle of the street, the guy at the front of their group points his finger at me and says, "It's him. It's him." I put my hands up and he goes, "It's the guy from Ms. 45. That's it. That moment right there, I decided to get out of movies. That's it. That moment right there. Okay. We laughed. Meanwhile, the cars had stopped to watch what they thought was going to be this amazing, like, kung fu fight film. A little one-sided. They were actually disappointed there wasn't a fist fight. These guys were all patting me on the back, saying, "Man, you did a great job. It was unbelievable. I really enjoyed the film," which is another amazing testimony to Abel
Mm-hmm.
that he had this broad spectrum of appeal, almost like, I mean, I don't think it's an insult to say this, like a martial arts film,
Mm-hmm.
frankly. The gunplay and the whole act of self-defense is really nothing more. Anyway, that's my Times Square story.
I gotta say, one of the things I love about Miss 45, I love the locations in it. It's beautiful location work in that movie. And when you have an independent movie where you don't have big special effects and whatnot, locations can play a big part in the look of your film, and it certainly did with Miss 45. Um, I really enjoyed all the location work in that film. But
Well,
yeah.
Abel had the eye. This is part of the capturing of what I would call the real experience or the verite. Part of it really is the eye that selects these images, not just in terms of location, but even the ones that end up on the floor of the editing room. It's basically discernment, and but more than that, because discernment only accounts for what you do with what you capture. He had the ability to go after. He was a hunter. He You could see basically that he loved New York because he's almost like Jacques Tati. Okay, you would see a Tati film where all of a sudden he's showing the modern facade of buildings falling off. in his comedy films, revealing the bricks underneath from the old days, as if to say that, they're not really gone. And I think that's, if you notice, it may look like he's showing you decrepit New York. He's really not. He's showing you historic New York. There's a difference. In other words, it's a nostalgia. It's not a criticism.
Absolutely, absolutely. So after Miss 45, you got out of the business, and I know that you had mentioned you had written a lot of books, and is that what you went into after this?
Not directly. I had friends. I mean, because I was in the band and I collected a lot of stage clothes from the 1950s and 40s. I just had tons and tons of friends asking me to help them out. Hey, I got this to do or that to do. And so I ended up, getting clothing on Springsteen and, the Bette Midler band in the 80s and doing a bunch of um, photography jobs with guys like Torkel Gunderson and Bill King.
Mhm.
And I mean, it was kind of a fun time until I got robbed, because I was still working in movies. I did clothes for Jeff Daniels and Kelly McGillis in
Mhm.
House on Carroll Street. And I made a lot of money. I could have bought a new Porsche with what I made, but I put it in the business. And then the business got robbed because it was all in a truck. And, it happened Christmas of, I guess it was 86.
Okay.
And then everybody said, oh, don't worry about it. You know, trying to be gung ho, everybody's down once. So I said, yeah, okay. So I fought my way back. 2 years later, I had the business, back up again. And then I got robbed the second time in New York. And so I came to Florida. I was going to go just to visit mom, for Christmas. And I never came back. And I did very well. I worked with Rita Ryak during that period. She got an Academy Award nomination for The Grinch. Unbelievable work in that. I provided her most of the clothing, well, some of the clothing, let's just say, for in the 80s for her. Helped out on John Sayles' Eight Men Out.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, honestly, I began as a dimensional animator before, I don't know, I got to an age and a point where people just said, hey, you would look good doing this. And, for shits and giggles, I went along with it. But I really had spent 10 years before all this being a geek and a nerd, winning science fairs with movies and doing dimensional animation, which also at that same time became obsolete because in 79 they came out with the first wireframe animation for a dinosaur walk. And the moment I saw it, I knew I was obsolete. I had to sell the Ice Factory because there was air conditioning now.
Hmm.
And so it was really, a series of factors. I mean, I don't want to lay it all on the brothers on Times Square, but, it was really a series of factors that contributed to, my exit. But the books that I wrote really came after I lost my wife. I mean, I had, this is not about cinema and this is not about Miss 45. It's about me. So I don't want to go too deeply into it, but
Hmm.
I guess you could say that it really began with 9/11. As a New Yorker, I saw the towers fall, and I just felt a call to return back to the arts.
Hmm.
And so a couple of years after that, I became the distributor for Seiko Instruments on a watch called Think the Earth
Hmm.
as basically an Earth awareness project. Before any of that was very popular, and and then more recently, after I lost Gina, my wife, uh, well, do you really want to
Sure.
know? Well, I am a member of a very unique community. I lost my wife Christmas Eve of 2006.
I'm sorry.
And thank you, Greg. And April 2nd of 2007, just a couple of months later, Um, I had a close encounter of the third kind in my home. I actually witnessed a series of seemingly inexplicable lights, um, which to, I guess, an untrained eye might seem like, something impossible to impart to another human. And I've been trying for the last 15 years to do that and still can't. But more than actually a light source, it was a thing that took the light around it and made it look a certain way, almost like a magnet. And anytime you talk about a magnet, you're talking about a black hole. And I think what I saw in my house was a time machine. I think what I saw in my house specifically was the four wheels of Ezekiel, which are incorrectly described as spaceships. No, no, no. They're circles of magnetism that lead to doorways to, I don't know, a different place, a different time. And so I began to write books suddenly after that experience about a different place and a different time. One of them was 40,000 years ago, when one of those books called the Book of Enoch claimed that the first angels came to earth in a group of 200. And I guess I astral projected using the technique to actually go to that time and that place, which was the White Hills of Dover in England, as the touchdown place. I think they call it the Seven Sisters colloquially. And I wrote an entire series of 11 books of what I saw from these individuals coming to visit us for the very first time 40,000 years ago, and all the chaos that to this very day we're still coping with.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery. I mean, why do you think the Catholic Church today does not want to release the secret books of Enoch? Why didn't they put it in the Bible? Because they know that then people would basically pray to these, you know, other individuals, or beings, and basically superseding the church, and and somehow getting between themselves and God, if such a thing could happen. And without delving into religious dysfunction too deeply, that's basically the genesis of why I decided to come back to art after 9/11, and what it led to, basically, that book series, and actually one more recently that I don't have a publisher for, but I think it's an important book because it's a contemporary book, and it's more about somebody that is relevant to our discussion, because it's about a film star. It's about Marilyn Monroe.
Love Marilyn.
Well, I wrote a book about her and John
Mm-hmm.
and the machine.
Okay.
And the day before she died, the CIA sent a bulletin, and they notified the FBI that she was going to have a meeting the following day of her death with Kilcairn, the reporter. And guess what? She never made it. And this story that I wrote, I used the same technique. I astrally projected to 1961 to California. I sat in the room when she died, and I wrote down what I saw. And it's not what anybody has written. And you could say that it's fiction, but if you've been following the things that I've been saying and some of
Mm-hmm.
the understandings that I appear to have, and
Mm-hmm.
if you take some of the events that I've relayed as actually having happened, which they have, you can mix it all up into, again, a very unusual story, which this is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you said you had written over 50 books?
That's correct. They just come out of
Wow.
me. I'm
Yeah.
good for 15 pages a day until my brain starts to hurt on this side. I know that
Hmm.
sounds strange, but this is not stream of consciousness writing. I'm not just pulling words out of the Jungian, atmosphere. No, it's not that at all. This is really different. This is closer to conjuring, but it when you dream, for
Hmm.
example, for example, um, every time you have a simple dream, your spirit is leaving your body. It's taking you somehow, some way. I can't explain it because we leave our eyes and our ears behind, but we can still hear and we can still see.
Hmm.
I know this because I was on a job in Tennessee the night my mother died. Only I didn't know it, but somehow I did because I went to sleep that night before I came back the next day and I had a dream. And you know what I saw in my dream? I saw a dear mama. Only I saw her with a bandage on her ankle because she was in the hospital at the time that had only been put on the day before while I was away. So I had no knowledge of it. So how did I see her 700 miles away if I wasn't there? And I wasn't. I was in Tennessee. I wasn't in Florida where she was in the hospital, but I was because I saw it. And this is a variation of that. And the connection is love. I mean, when you love somebody, you know them. You know where they are. You know how they feel. You don't have to say a word to them. They don't have to say anything to you. A mother knows when her child is sick. This is the reason why there's an invisible conversation taking place. So that's all I really used. It's actually you could almost say, a mother's love is what I use to write these books.
Okay. Okay. So, what do you have coming up? You got any books that you're working on right now?
I finished Marilyn's book last year, but I refused to self-publish it because I think she deserves better. After even writing the experiences that she endured in this book, it's a very favorable book,
Hmm.
but it's written like Ms. 45. Do you
Oh,
understand?
nice.
You
Yep.
understand what I'm telling you? It's
Hmm.
extremely gritty. There's a lot of blood, and it doesn't back off. So this is not the side. This is the side that the publicists would never have shown. And this is because it's JFK, the side that the government has been spending the last 45 years trying to hide.
Hmm.
I mean, they're only talking now about disclosure since what, the pandemic, which is another bizarre coincidence. March 21st, they declare we have a pandemic. 2 weeks later, they declare there's UAPs from the Air Force. I mean, is that a coincidence that they, somehow accidentally, released two of the most important bits of information to human history in probably the last century?
Yep.
I'm not suggesting a connection or a conspiracy, Greg.
No,
This is
I'm not judging. I'm just listening and um
I don't know what to make of it either, frankly,
yeah.
but loosely what I think is we're inching towards what they might say is disclosure, and then frankly, my book about Maryland will not be as exotic.
Hmm.
Well, because then we'll know a lot more, but right now we don't. So, my latest book anyway, sheds light more on what we don't know than what we do.
Where can people purchase your books? Like you got a web
So
page or anything like that?
thank you for asking.
Yep.
I have the most often copied series on Amazon. I want to get this out for the record. Section 230 is an abomination that protects platforms. It steals elections. It's the reason why Trump got elected in 16. Okay, that was basically, interference of the most discreet kind. And but that's where they are. Okay, they're on Amazon under Vincent Grupi or Chaplin Kaplan, which is a pseudonym I've used for the last two books. I was also a karate teacher for a few years, and it just turns out by accident that my karate teacher, this is an interesting story. When I was 11 years old, I went to Florida by car for the first time in '68. We stayed at a place called the Sahara on Collins Avenue. Little did I know, across the street was a club called The Image, and on the marquee it said Jimi Hendrix. And even as an 11-year-old, I had his records. Okay, he was,
Hmm.
Jimmy and the Moody Blues were the two first albums I ever bought at 10 or 11.
Not
And
bad.
and the irony is, the guy that owned that club was going to become my karate teacher in 1991. And this is 1968 that I almost met him. I was a rock's throw away. So that's the book that I wrote about, and it's called The Castaways. The Castaways being the first club they had before The Image. And Larry Peasy is the guy that threw Jim Morrison off the stage at the famous blowout in 1968. This in Dinner Key. It's getting late, getting a little tired. So, pulling all this information out is getting a little challenging. But essentially, he had over 100 acts in less than 12 months in his club. And he did Dinner Key with the Doors, and he did with Jimi Hendrix, he did the Miami Highlight show with Jimi Hendrix and the Experience. And so, and of course, the Dinner Key show for the Doors was pivotal because within a couple of years, Jim was dead. And a couple of months after that show, he had told interviewers that the reason he canceled Woodstock, even though he knew it was going to be big and great, was his quote was, "I don't want to get killed by a sniper."
Okay.
Nobody really understands what that's about, but in my book, I explain it. Basically, what happened was, my karate teacher was also a cop, and he was also a drug dealer, and he was also a producer, and it all got somehow mixed up into security, partying, and producing, which is like the magic trio that everyone still uses today in the rap business. And but the problem was that they bought his contract from a college. Originally, Jim had gone to a college that he wanted to thank by giving them a contract for a performance, at a much reduced price because of his celebrity. And Larry's partner came up with the idea of buying the school's contract when he found out as a realtor that they were having difficulty because they were selling parts of their property, indicating thus. So he became aggressive and said, well, if they need money, maybe they'll sell the contract with the Doors, and they did. And then when the Doors found out that they were basically working, for friendly rates for strangers, they objected. And it ended up in the courts. And nobody knows that. I mean, they know about his famous, Anita Bryant trial later on when he stuck his finger out of his fly. And that's when Larry pulled him off the stage. Okay. But they don't know actually the more pivotal story in Jim Morrison's life was when basically, are you listening, Greg?
Yep.
Basically, the Doors sued the mob. And you didn't do that in 1968 at the height of their power. You just didn't
No.
do that. And nobody knows about this story, but I told it. And I haven't really advertised it, except to 1 million people right now,
Mm-hmm.
because neither of the teachers that I wrote about it in the book are speaking to me as a result of it. I mean, the first one, whom I wrote it about, which is Larry, has just decided to move on after, I don't know, 35 years of friendship because I didn't come up with a movie or a big book contract, or he needs plausible deniability. I'm not sure which. I
Okay.
love him, but when you write books about people that have explosive lives, sometimes you get caught in the backblast. Um, and then when I showed it to John, his partner, which the story is about Larry and John, these two partners that go through all these events. John said that I was really the bad boy, not Larry. In other words, what you have here is a story about two lifelong competitors, each of whom thought it should be about them. And even if it was, that still wouldn't be enough because then it would have to be, an A-list film or on the New York Times bestseller list because they have very, very big, well, I hope this doesn't get me killed, but they have big egos. And I
Hmm.
don't blame them for that because they did big things. They really did. Larry was the first one to have a mixed club in 1968 Florida. Do you have any clue as to how dangerous that was?
I can imagine.
These guys had constant death threats. That's the what I write about is why we have crime. There's a reason, and I'm not saying that's as a negative thing. In other words, you have by crime I mean criminals. These guys by the law were criminals, but there was a need for them because nobody else could have contained this bomb long enough to then be able to call it rock and roll in below the Mason Dixon line. Okay, because that just didn't happen in 67, 68, and 69. It just didn't happen. People were still getting lynched in that time. And so, the amazing risks that they took and the consequences. Larry told me that the last offer he got after the court case and the subsequent fallout from Dinner Key was Canned Heat was doing a European tour, and they asked him to come and be his man and be their manager, and he said, "I'm going to pass." He had gotten to that point, just like I was in the middle of Times Square.
Yeah.
So, I love these guys. Don't misunderstand when I make certain comments. They're larger than life. These guys, I mean, they fought in tournaments with Chuck Norris. They
Hmm.
knew Bruce Lee. These were seminal figures in and it's an untold story in the story of integration in America. Because the other aspect of them being law enforcement is that was one of the few institutions in that time that integrated. Besides the United States military, the second place that forced integration, for better or worse, was the police force. And so these were great, um, again, to use the term, a crucible from which a lot of leaders came. People that found out working with each other wasn't so bad. And then they went on to do that in private life. Like these guys had karate schools filled with Spanish people, Black people, Asian people, and white people, gay people, women that were recently divorced and afraid of their husbands, FBI. Larry's teacher was Hachi John Pachivas. I mean, the founder of karate in the state of Florida. So there's a lot of legacy, a lot of history, a lot of reputation, um, and it's a grand story, um, and that's available now. But I only sold one copy because I'm not advertising it because these guys and myself, are not completely in parity. So I've kind of, and let me tell you something. You remember what I said to you early on? When
Hmm.
to step.
Yep.
Well, Greg, after all the fallout from writing this crazy story, I kind of did that. I kind of stepped back. So, I mean, you can't be so, I mean, in my opinion, if you have a friend or someone that you love and you happen to write a story about them, you can't just forget that you love them and that they're your friend. You know, I mean, I know you have an obligation to the truth as a writer or as an artist, but you also have an obligation to your soul, to whom you love. So
Absolutely.
if someone comes along and wants to handle that correctly, I would run with it. But for now, I'm not going to start publishing dozens of ads to advertise it quite yet. But it's
Mhm.
available. It is.
Okay.
It's called the Castaways, and it's basically the untold story of Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I was born in 1972, so they were both gone before I came to be, and it's tragic. And but they both had a huge influence on the music industry, and I still listen to their music to this day.
You have to consider this, okay?
Mhm.
As a favor, okay, Larry met Jimmy in LA.
Hmm.
Okay. They got along so well that he invited him, that Jimmy offered to play Larry's club even before he had it. I mean, that really is saying a lot. And between you and me, it was probably the drugs.
Okay.
Okay. But, but, okay, you have to consider the moment. This was 161st Street and Collins Avenue in the heart of the Deep South. And and they were going to have a black headliner at a white club, Jimi Hendrix. And so at what point does a person's celebrity supersede their skin color? Well, down here, that hadn't happened yet. Seriously, it hadn't.
Hmm.
And so again, you almost this story could almost have not happened were it not involving black belts, if you know what I mean. I mean, only
Hmm.
somebody that crazy and willing to put it on the line could have gotten it done. Because there was, from the police department to the local merchants, there was a constant string of threats, constantly. What are these kids doing here? They're too young to be in the club. My own sister was 16 years old and she snuck in. And I included her experiences in the book because she's a teller. She was actually there. And they had a room in the back of the club that was, the LSD room. Now, the way that I wrote it in the book, just to explain what a genius Larry was that he told them the LSD room was the black room. And then the rest of the club was the white room. So,
Okay.
so that then they would think, oh, it's segregated. We don't have anything to worry about. No, that was the place that everybody did their drugs. It really, it would almost take a genius again to figure out how to get away with something like that. It would have been easier to rob a bank in the South than have a black performer in 1968 at a white club.
Oh, wow.
I mean, so
Wow.
I think it's a story. I sent a copy to a friend of mine in New York who teaches black studies at a college in the city. I mean, I don't know. I guess you have to see past certain things to get to the point where where you might interpret it as um, as Black history, even though they're not black. I mean, one of the five central players was a guy who just passed away last year. Okay, and this he was a tournament fighter named Tony. He was on the circuit as late as the 1990s. I mean, these guys fought together, literally, almost like some kind of invisible army. They competed for 20 to 25 years together as a team. Beginning all the way back in the late 60s. So it's also a story of camaraderie and bravery and inspiration because they were so disparate. I mean, they all came from big, you had the Jewish guy, half Irish, half Italian guy, the black guy, this, crazy Cuban guy, the guy nobody knows where he's from guy. I mean, and somehow, like some amazing puzzle, they all fit together and made this amazing nightclub happen.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Um, Led Zeppelin
Hmm.
played there. I mean, you just, 100 power bands. Everybody, Janis Joplin was the only one that didn't want to play there.
Ah,
She said, I'm not playing in a bowling alley, which is what it was before they turned it into a club. So,
some good bands there though. Of course, the '70s had a lot of talent. So,
well, this
because I,
was the run was from 68 to 69.
hmm
So, I mean, even if you look politically, that's when that's when Nixon came in and the
yep.
Vietnam War went, when everybody went nuts. And just to give you some perspective, to get back to myself,
Hmm.
um, when I went to NYU in '75 was the year that we all got thrown out of Vietnam.
Hmm.
We had to leave Saigon, and I was going to NYU. That was the first year that I went to NYU, and I had no idea, no clue, until about a year into my studies, how many of my teachers were actually communists. And when I got to the fourth year into film school, I had teachers who were so anti-war that one of them, actually two of them, refused to grade me because they knew I was the only student at NYU that was also in the Army as a reservist. And they protested that. They said, "You guys, what? You guys, I'm standing here right in front of you. There's only one of me, are responsible for an illegal war. What? I didn't send me there. My commander in chief, AKA the president, did. Um, and of course, the reason I signed up was precisely because, of people like him, not because of what he thought, but actually, in spite of himself, I was actually protecting his right to be wrong. Because, of course, if everyone thought like him, then we wouldn't exist as a country. But um, so, all of these factors contributed back in the late '60s, and in particular in '68 and '69 when all the riots started, to a great reshuffling of the deck. And you saw it in the Republican Party. Eventually, when we got into the '80s, you had guys like Gingrich just ready to throw wrenches in machines. Um, and even the way we fought wars changed. I mean, in the mid '60s, Kennedy hires, oh God, he hires an executive from Ford to be his um, well, he's the commander in chief. So I can't think of the proper title for this, and this is where it's a little bit late, and I'm
That's
starting to
okay.
get. But in other words, yeah, McNamara, that's it. Robert McNamara was his name,
Hmm.
and because he came from Ford and was tasked with fighting our wars, he used a production line approach and came up with the concept of limited warfare. And within that concept, you could fight a country for 100 years. In other words, because your goal is not to win; it's limited. And this is what led to all the soldiers on the field feeling like, why are we here and losing lives if our goal is not simply to win, but rather just to survive? And we're still doing it to this day with Ukraine. We're not in it to win, or we would have pounded that son of a bitch. No, we're waging a limited engagement basically. And so this period that we're discussing in the late '60s, even into really, if you want to understand Abel's mindset, it was like mine. We were not for any of that. We were counterculture to that. And that didn't mean that you couldn't plug into the culture as I did with the Army, because a lot of us who wanted change attempted to change from the inside. So that's the reason why eventually a guy like Abel, who was an outsider, went into, the Hollywood system to become an A director eventually. Because I think he wanted to, from the inside, show his particular brand of style in his craft. And in any event, I hope that's just a little bit of a background to understand, why some of these early pioneers in karate and in stories about integration are unheralded, but they're important because he had all these amazing forces pressing down on all of us back then. Even I, as a young person in '68, I was just 11 years old when I was, across the street from my future karate teacher. But because we drove down from New York for the first time, I guess it was, I guess we had a new '68 Chevy station wagon. And for the first time, once I got to Delaware and the South, I saw segregation signs. And I said to my mom, I says, Mom, what the hell is this black and white? What the hell is that? She said, oh, those are segregation signs. And she had to actually explain it to me. And little did I know I was going to end up at a destination that was going to actually play a part in desegregating. Okay. So, I mean, even from its inception, this whole, just when I became even conscious of this place, it was part of that specific journey of understanding of racism in America. And now I get to tell the story about some guys that challenged that. So I'm kind of happy about that in spite of all the drama. But you know what? If it's not a real enough story, how can I put this? When they wrote the original Godfather, they had to change a lot of names.
Yeah.
So the other thing I did is I changed every name in this book.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not hard to figure out who each of them are because the changes are small, but I did that too. I also amazingly, coincidentally, took up axe and knife defense after finishing writing it. So now I'm a knife axe expert and have a large collection of knives and axes.
Oh, cool.
It's just a hobby.
Well, you know what? It's very interesting, I was gonna say after since Miss 45, have you encountered Abel or Zoe or anybody like that from the film since its release? Or have you lost touch entirely?
So the last time I saw Abel, I was in New York's nightclub area,
Mm-hmm.
and this was a great nightclub. I think opened from '85 to around '88. A lot of wonderful people worked there, and it was very creative because they had art installations every month that would change. And so, they must have had some interesting art installation that Abel was enamored with, but he was there. And I think I saw him with his wife, and I was telling him about the latest 1940s noir movie that I had seen where some guy was getting killed with a machine gun, but the guy getting killed was deaf. So the director, in his wisdom, for the moment that he gets shot, completely pulls out the sound. So you don't just get the point of view of the dead guy. I don't know. You get the point of hearing, which is nothing. So it was very unsettling, I thought, and we laughed about it. And it was just something that we shared. And I said to him, maybe I shouldn't tell you any more stories or give you any more good ideas. And we laughed about that too, and shook hands, and that was the last time I saw Abel Ferrara.
Seen Zoe since?
No, unfortunately, I think I had seen her at the same club.
Mm-hmm.
That was really the hottest club in New York at the time. So if you were anybody, that was the place where you were going to go. And she was with an older gentleman wearing a cape, which I thought was a bit unusual. And portended not very well for the poor girl, which we all learned eventually actually transpired, sadly.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you know what, Vincent? It was wonderful having you come on here tonight. I'm so glad we were able to do this, and I'm so glad I was able to find you,
You didn't get
and
me
that
past my bedtime. You never would have got all this out of me. So you're a very wise interviewer. You struck like a hawk and turned a test into an interview, which was actually very creative on your part. So I'm pleased to be a part of this.
I'm
Hopefully,
glad.
yeah. Don't put this in Chat GPT and switch it around so it sounds like I'm from some other planet or
Y-
some other unusual thing. I would appreciate.
Oh no, I don't know anything about editing on this stuff, so I mean, so I think you're good, So but yeah, you're fine, I'm so glad to have you on here. Do you have Miss 45 on Blu-ray yet? Oops,
I don't
where's
have it
the
on. I don't have it on Blu-ray, but I saw it a couple of months ago when I guess it was on Netflix.
Oh, there you go.
Was it? Wait a minute. Was it Netflix or Peacock? I'm not sure which. Could have been Peacock. But I saw the cut version. I didn't see the uncut version.
Oh, you should order the Blu-ray. It's got the uncut. But there you go, a line of her face there with that gun and then pulling the trigger. I guess we know who she pulls that trigger.
Is that actually me? Did I?
Yeah.
Did I make the cover of the DVD?
Well, she did, but you know who she's firing at, in that little
Gotcha.
clip.
Isn't
Yeah.
that isn't that exactly what 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 they did in the? Didn't they just rip that off in the Matrix? That one shot
They
where she
could
goes
have,
like,
yeah.
I mean, well, I mean, it's really exaggerated. And doesn't that turn up in all the Matrix One advertising? That one down the barrel of a gun.
Oh
I remember,
yeah.
I remember, mostly from the advertising, but just a thought, final thought. They, lovers of movies never forget.
Yeah. No, it's good. There's not a whole lot in the extended version of this, like when Abel Ferreira, of course, as Jimmy Lane is committing the first rape in the alley. There's a few shots of, when he unzips his pants or whatever, and you see stuff like that, but and you see a little more
Was there more
door.
sexual content?
I think it's a little more violent, but I don't see a whole lot of a difference. There's a little bit more added to the second rape scene where this burglar didn't turn out so well. you know,
That was
um,
the role that I tested for. This,
yeah,
I believe. I mean, I got my rapist confused, but I believe I tested for the second rapist.
the
I,
second rapist. Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
think it was hard.
He's.
I think he wanted me to use. I think Abel wanted me to use himself as as the subject of the woman being raped,
Hmm.
and boy, there goes your um, your level of disbelief right there. I was somehow unable to look at him and visualize Zoe. So I apparently for that reason did not render the performance he was looking for.
Hmm.
And let's face it, in my defense, there really is a physiological difference. I mean, she is incredibly beautiful, and Abel is, as an actor, he would be a character actor. I mean, he's a character.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was that.
All in all, what was your impressions of the film when you finally saw it?
So the premiere, um, walking out, some people came over and said, nice job and such. You're going to think this is picky, but I was a nerd and I was a special effects guy. And I was so pissed that they left. I mean, that they, didn't do better special effects. I came away tragically sad that, Abel didn't have the budget to do what I knew he was capable of.
Hmm.
That was my snap reaction. But but I got to be honest. I looked at the movie after not seeing it for 25 years um, to prepare for the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was the cut version, I honestly have to say my impression of it now is much better than it was when I saw it. And I think mostly because I've had the ability to put it into perspective of his other work. And so I can see certain tendencies, developing in this that I didn't see back then because they hadn't progressed yet. Um, but also, I don't know, maybe because I'm a different viewer, all these years later, and I was actually able to look at it a little more objectively. Back then, I mean, I was still, making films, and you know how it is. It's like, oh, it's another 5 carat diamond if you're a jeweler. I mean, you become
Yep.
a little bit desensitized, like these guys on a porno set. Somebody's getting a hand job and another person's eating a tuna salad. I mean, so please don't let me leave you with that last impression and image. Okay. But anyway, that's, my feeling after 25 years was that it was actually a better film than I thought it was when it was made. And I think that's a testament to it. I think all good and certainly great works of art create a change that at first is uncomfortable and can be perceived as badness or not goodness. But then, as time reveals its true nature, one comes to understand that what we were looking at was not bad at all, but something beautiful and new. And I think that's what Abel managed to accomplish.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, is there anything else that you want to share with us before we close off? Like, well, for example, you plug your webpage on here. Where can people find you?
Uh, well, I really don't want to be found.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm
I mean,
talking about mainly your books,
I'm doing
but
I'm doing this. Well, the books are available on Amazon right now,
okay.
and hopefully elsewhere in the future. If anyone listening, including a Canadian, which I don't say in any particular way, but
Hmm.
I know that that's where you are, and maybe that's where your local audience exists. Um, I would be very interested in talking to somebody who was sensitive to film stars and film history and could possibly do justice to a story about Marilyn and JFK,
Absolutely, absolutely.
someone like that. Otherwise, I keep my nose clean. They're very low profile.
Hmm.
I run a small antique business now just to provide the time to be able to write. And, you know, Amazon, every time I sell a book on Amazon, they send me 20 something cents. So it's not a get rich quick scheme. I'm attempting, like most artists, just to produce something real.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, do you got any charities that you're passionate about that you want to plug on here?
I got to be honest, the last charity I plugged was the Lily Ford Foundation. I gave them thousands of dollars and then I found out that it was fraud. I
Ooh,
I would advise that, and I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but if you're going to give money away, which is a good thing. I mean, I do it, I do it every day. I mean, we had a cold snap a couple of weeks ago and I was at Goodwill and the guy ahead of me had one eye and he was wheeling his entire life's possessions and he was buying a comforter so he wouldn't freeze that night. So I just handed her my credit card and said, this is for him. I mean, put the money in their hands
mm-hmm.
is how don't be, it's not, there's no shame. Some people will say no if they're too proud. I've had people say no, but just once the moment arises, try to help somebody immediately and instantly. Is in my opinion, my humble opinion, the best way. But I mean, um, God, did I just say something other than what you wanted to hear?
Nope,
I'm sorry.
nope. You know what? No, that's a good answer. Nope. I always allow my guests to, if they have any charities or anything like that, I always allow them to,
Thank you.
yep, that's no problem. No problem. Well, Vincent, it was wonderful having you come on here tonight. I thank you for giving me your time. I'm glad we were able to make this happen, and um, I'm honored that you were willing to come on here. I remember you well from this film, and uh, what an interesting movie. I'm glad that I've had done highlighted one guest or one. I highlighted Zoe in five tributes and had Steven Singer and yourself on here, so and maybe never know, maybe eventually I might get Abel on here. Who knows? I heard he's not the easiest person to get hold of, but there's a lot of people from this film it's hard to get hold of as well. I was surprised I got you and Steven. So
I'll
I was
reach
very
out to
lucky.
Greg. I'll
Sure.
I'll attempt to see if I can locate him and communicate with him. And if I'm successful, I'll certainly let you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before I let you go, would you mind doing a plug for my show?
How?
Just state your name and that you were part of Miss 45 and say you're listening to Greg Gilbert on Python's Paradise. You got to write that down.
No, I got to put my glasses on.
Oh, you got glasses on. Oh,
Let's see.
go for it.
Well, this is Vince Grupi for Greg Gilbert at Python's Paradise, inviting you all to another fabulous episode. See you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Vincent, for coming on the show. This was a pleasure and an honor, and I hope you enjoyed it. It wasn't too hard on you, and because I know you don't do a lot of these, and
Greg, I
so.
don't do any. I don't do any. There's no pictures of me when I was in my band because I wouldn't let people photograph me and then
Mhm.
use my pictures for free, which they were doing downtown a lot in those days, with collages and weird stuff. Um, but I did it for the record, and I did it because of your passion, Greg. You wouldn't leave me alone for 3 months. You drove me friggin' crazy. Okay, so there's an old question. I said to my friend Lisa, the hooker, I said, Lisa, why did you have sex with Harold? You don't like him. He doesn't like you. But why did you have sex with him? She says, I fucked him just to get rid of him. Greg,
Funny answer, yeah.
seriously though, it was an honor because I really do take Abel and his work and mine with him very seriously. And, having participated in that moment in history and life was, a cherished thing. And this is probably the only time I'm going to talk about it and with the only person, I would imagine. So it's an interesting, unique connection that we've made. And I hope, it helps others think about what it's like to be in the business. And remember this, in my opinion, yet again, two things. One, you've killed my battery, okay, because you really are talking too long. And the other thing is, for those who are in the industry, honestly, okay, take a step back if you need to. Okay, don't just listen to others. Listen to yourself.
Hmm.
And if you need to save yourself, step back and don't listen to what others think about you. But notice how much better you may feel for having done so as the real payment for your choices, as opposed to not feeling better. And then unfortunately leading to some of the stories that we've just told tonight. We don't want that to happen to wonderful, creative people. So,
No.
if I had a charity, and I really should have one in my wife's name because those damn antidepressants are what's killing people instead of helping them.
Hmm.
Uh, I would say that if you're thinking about doing something desperate or you're simply not happy and don't understand why you should continue, reach out to somebody, call somebody, even a stranger, take a chance if you can to ask somebody else's opinion about your life, even though it might mean sharing. Um, because I think silence in this case can be deadly. And the pressures in the creative industry are extremely high today. Movies don't cost millions anymore, they cost billions.
Yeah,
So how can a single human being carry that weight? It's really inhuman if you think about it. So I'll say it one last time. If you need to, for God's sake and your own, just take a step back if you need to.
absolutely. Well, Vincent, I bid you a good night. Thank you so much for the honor, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to chat with you tonight. This was fantastic. This went far beyond the what I mean, I knew it was going to be a good interview, but this was even better than I thought it was going to be.
Extremely kind of you to say your check is in the mail, Greg.
Well, Vincent, we're signing off here. God bless you. Thank you so much, and
God bless you too, my friend.
stay out of the cold. We got a snowstorm going on here, so
I, I salute Canada. Keep protecting our north.
absolutely, absolutely. All right, you take care, man.
Take care, Greg. Bye bye.
Bye bye.